For A, we're going to look at solving quadratics by factoring. So we spent all of last unit learning how to factor, and now we're going to use that to actually solve some equations. So one thing you need to know, solutions to a quadratic equation, we're looking for the x values that make the equation equal 0. And there are 3 other names for solutions. All 4 of those words mean the exact same thing. So those words are roots, zeros, x-intercepts. So if it asks you for any of these 4 things, roots, zeros, x-intercepts, or solutions, they all mean the same thing. Okay, so x squared plus 21 equals 10x, and we're going to solve that by factoring. I'm going to write it down here so I have room to actually solve it. Okay, the first step is to set the equation equal to 0. So I need to move everything over to one side. So I'm going to subtract 10x from both sides. And I'm going to go ahead and write it in standard form. So it's going to go x squared, then x, and then the constant. Alright, so once I have it set equal to 0, then I can factor it. So x squared minus 10x plus 21, I'm going to factor that. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to 21 and add to negative 10. Alright, that would be negative 7 and negative 3. So my factors are x minus 7 and x minus 3. Alright, and then once it is factored, you're going to set each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to have 2 solutions. I have x minus 7 equals 0, and to solve that I would add 7 to both sides, so x equals 7. And I'm also going to have x minus 3 equals 0. And to solve that, I would add 3 to both sides, and I get x equals 3. So these would be my 2 solutions, x equals 7 and x equals 3. Okay. If the equation is missing the bx term, meaning that middle term, if it just has squared and a number, there's 2 ways we can solve it. We can solve it by factoring, because we learned how to factor this. X squared minus 9, that only has 2 terms, and both of those terms are perfect squares. So the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 9 is 3. So my 2 factors would be x plus 3 and x minus 3. That's a difference of squares. Okay, and then we would set each factor equal to 0 and solve, and I get x equals negative 3 or x equals 3. The other way that we could solve this is by taking a square root. So I can just straight up solve for x since there's no middle x term, so I can add 9 to both sides. And I would have x squared equals 9, and then the opposite of x squared would be to take the square root of both sides, and I would get x equals plus or minus 3. We have to do that plus or minus part anytime we take the square root of something, because if I take the square root of 9, it could be positive 3. 3 times 3 is 9, but it also could be negative 3, because negative 3 times negative 3 would be 9. So anytime you're taking the square root of something to solve, you have to do this plus or minus. There's 2 possible answers there. Alright, the other thing we're going to look at is going backwards, given the roots writing the equation. So given that the roots are x equals 2 and x equals negative 1, write the equation in standard form. Alright, if I have roots at 2 and negative 1, what you need to know is that roots and factors are always opposites. So if I have a root or a solution at x equals 2, that means the factor there is x minus 2. Alright, if I have a root at negative 1, my factor is going to be x plus 1. They are always opposites. Alright, and then to get it into standard form, I'm going to multiply these out. Alright, I'm going to FOIL, or if you learn the box method, however you were taught to multiply polynomials like this. So x times x is x squared, x times 1 is x, negative 2 times x is negative 2x, and negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. And then don't forget to simplify your like terms. Alright, x minus 2x is negative 1x minus 2. So that would be an equation that has roots at x equals 2 and x equals negative 1. Same type of problem here, but now we have one root that is a fraction. X equals negative 3 over 4. Alright, anytime you have a fraction, the denominator of the fraction is going to be the coefficient of x. So when I write my factor, it's going to be 4x, and then because it is negative, I'm going to say plus 3. Because remember, when we were going at the beginning, when we were solving these, we were setting these equal to 0. So if I set this equal to 0 and solve, I would subtract 3. So I would have 4x equals negative 3, and then I would divide by 4 on both sides. So x equals negative 3 over 4. Alright, so this is my factor, and I'm just proving to you where that came from. Alright, and then negative 5 is the other root, so that's just the opposite. X plus 5 is the factor, and then again we're going to FOIL. So 4x times x, 4x squared, 4x times 5 is 20x, 3 times x is 3x, and 3 times 5 is 15. Simplified, I get 4x squared plus 23x plus 15, and that is it for 4a.